Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about synchronicity, also known as serendipity, or what I like to call coincidence that has a conscience. The term synchronicity comes from the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung in a 1930s lecture, and he called it the simultaneous occurrence of events that appear to have meaningful connection when there's no causal relationship between them. Some might say synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous. Deepak Chopra calls it the spontaneous fulfillment of desire. I'm covering this topic at the request of a good friend who's in the midst of a series of synchronicities right now. About 5 or 6 months ago, she had a single appointment with an intuitive, something she'd never done before. She's actually doing some graduate work in spiritual psychology and is a very curious and almost scientifically minded person. She likes to experience things herself. So one of the things this woman told her was that she would meet a red-haired guy named Bill, and he would be kind of an outdoorsy type. And she said, "Bill? I don't think I've ever dated anyone named Bill. He sounds super white." She grew up in New York, the daughter of Russian and Italian immigrants. She's an Italian citizen herself. She speaks 3 languages and has spent much of the last few years living in Europe. And she almost exclusively dates dark-skinned, dark-haired, Southern European or Middle Eastern men. Months went by, we forgot all about it. And she came out to California. I got to see her for a little while, and she's spending some time in Seattle. And she was only there a couple days, and she met this red-headed whitewater rafting guide named Phil, who also happens to be a very successful tech startup guy. And they went on a couple dates. They really like each other, but they decided to just be friends for right now. And she's been running into him constantly. They were invited to the same barbecue. She's in the organic vegetable aisle. There he is. And I don't think he's stalking her. In fact, they ran into each other at a coffee shop. They were laughing about it. And she said she was meeting a friend for dinner. He said, "Oh, I'm going to go out for dinner tonight too. Where are you going?" And she said, "I'm going to Yoshi's Sushi." And he looked at her all crazy and said, "I have reservations tonight at Yoshi Sushi at 7 o'clock. She said, "I'll be there at 7:15. And their reserved tables, reserved with different people, were right next to each other. And we were laughing about it. And she said, I remember that intuitive also told me that I'd meet that guy, Bill, and then we'd decide to be friends." Although the predictions of the intuitive is a different topic than the series of serendipities that my friend is experiencing, they both speak to the idea that there's more going on in life than rational scientific materialism can explain. For me, synchronicity falls under the larger umbrella of what many might call grace. And some people don't like that word because, from many perspectives, grace is believed to be selective. Maybe only people that believe a certain religious text or behave a certain way might have the grace of God visited upon them. But having had my own life saved by grace and observed its actions hundreds of times over the years in many circumstances in many different people's lives, grace, serendipity, the goodwill and direction of the universe is available to all of us. In fact, my own personal development and a lot of the work that I do with clients in spiritual psychology is to help them develop what some might call their intuitive nature, to open to spiritual reality, and to be able to recognize and participate with these experiences in our life, and to appreciate them. One of my favorite teachers of consciousness studies happens to be a physicist. His name's Tom Campbell. And he has dedicated his life to the scientific study of so-called psychic phenomenon. Tom Campbell is a warm, funny, and brilliant guy with a huge YouTube channel and lots of extensive writing. His seminal work he calls My Big Toe, MBT, standing for My Big Theory of Everything. And he's got this fabulous blend of very white male scientific brain and incredibly open and connected spiritual experience. I had the privilege of doing a workshop with Tom, and he teaches people to do things like remote viewing, astral travel, intentional telepathy, where you send a word or an image to another person, and then you can check back with them and see if they got the message. He talks about these things like skills that we can all learn and develop and get better at. His organization is called MBT, and they do a lot of work with remote healing. And what Carl Jung called the transpersonal, Tom Campbell calls the larger consciousness system. And again, many would call it God. I call it the life force. And with open-mindedness, awareness, and perhaps a particular kind of attention, we can tune into that channel. Now, for some people, it may be of interest to try to influence or manipulate it. That's the realm of magic. From my perspective, we do better to surrender to it and learn from it. Be directed by it. Because my experience is the life force, God, the larger consciousness system, has our highest good in mind and has a meta perspective on our life that we are not able to have in our limited little ego self. Synchronicity, for me, tends to be most obvious through connections with other people, but some people experience synchronicity with numbers. I have a friend who's a mathematician. She's really into numbers. It's kind of her language. And she introduced me to this phenomenon of synchronous time or synchronous numbers. A few times every day, she comes upon repetitions of numbers. It'll be 5:55 in the afternoon. Her odometer reads 1,111 miles. Cash register comes out to $22.22. Some people call those angel numbers. And it's interesting, since I've opened to that idea, it's a phenomenon I notice in my own life. And I experience it as kind of a wink from the universe. Synchronicity for me is an affirmation that I'm in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. Something a lot of us don't feel in our culture that would lead us to believe that we're always behind and not doing or being enough. It's a frequent occurrence for many people that they'll think of a loved one and get a phone call or a message. We can call that a coincidence, or we can recognize that there's something deeper going on in that connection. I had a roommate once who was newly clean and sober, and he got pulled over for a headlight being out, and they discovered an old warrant, and they arrested him and impounded his car. And because it fell under some 3 strikes rule, he was going to go back to jail. And we were all really sad because he was doing so great, really turning his life around. And he said, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'm okay no matter what happens." And he went off to court, and we didn't expect to see him again. And he came back before lunchtime. We were shocked. And he said they couldn't find my file, and they dismissed the case. One of the most powerful experiences of synchronicity for me. In my mid-20s, I was really questioning my sexuality, and I was dating this guy. And this is in kind of conservative New England. Wouldn't be a big deal in the Bay Area in this day and age, but 30 years ago, in the Boston area, being openly gay was not a common thing. And I decided to share this conflict with my then boyfriend. And my biggest fear came true, and he kind of flipped out. Obviously, he had some sexual insecurity of his own and basically threw me out of the apartment. I was devastated. It was something I really hadn't talked openly about with anyone. And I came home to an empty house, hysterically crying. I was only home a few minutes, and there was a knock on the door. And one of my dearest friends from college, who I hadn't seen in years, who lived in another part of the state, thought he would drop by to visit. And my tears of conflict turned to tears of joy and exasperation because he was the only person that I had discussed this issue with ever in my life. And he's one of the most compassionate, open, receptive people that I knew. And I recognized that coincidence as a grace or synchronicity. And how it works, I can't tell you. But I know the more we recognize, appreciate, and pay attention to these experiences, the more guidance and affirmation they provide. I had a long period of time where synchronicity stopped happening. It was a period of intense darkness. I was deeply involved with someone who was actually a pathological liar and a pretty destructive person. But I really wanted the relationship to work out. In fact, I kind of wanted to save him. He was a fucking train wreck, but he was really cute and great in bed. And I was terrified of being alone. And up to that point in my life, I was the kind of person who, if my car broke down on the side of the road, someone would pull over within 5 minutes and bring me a gas can or help me get the car running again. At that stage, I was also driving cars that broke down all the time. So that was really handy. And I remember during this period of darkness, I went food shopping. And I had about 20 bags in the car. And the police pulled me over because my license plates were expired, because my partner hadn't paid the bill. And historically, they would have let me go. They impounded my car, and I sat on the side of the road with all my groceries and had to have someone else pick me up. And unlike my other friend who got picked up on an old warrant and it ended up clearing his record, that lack of serendipity clarified for me that I was going the wrong direction. It was another while before I ended that relationship, but almost instantly when he moved out, it was like someone opened the curtains and the lights went back on, and the tiny serendipities returned. And at that point, I willingly took a long period of time to be alone. In fact, I had a period of intentional celibacy, which I'll do a podcast about sometimes. Very powerful. And that which I had been terrified about healed and grounded me in a way I couldn't have imagined. Now, it is my experience that clarifying our intentions, prayer, and old-fashioned good works or acts of service can really open the field of serendipity and connect us with the transpersonal realm in helpful and powerful ways. So pay attention to the little coincidences. We live in an interactive universe. We're small parts of a great whole, what Tom Campbell calls individual units of consciousness in a larger consciousness system. And that system cares about us and has a wisdom far beyond our own limited awareness. And synchronicity is one of the ways that this larger consciousness system affirms that we're exactly where we're supposed to be, doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. That as complex and chaotic as it all may seem, I believe that everything is perfect for each of us in our own unfolding evolution. That suffering is a call for change and healing, and that joy, fulfillment, and synchronicity affirm and support and nourish us on our own evolutionary path. Eckhart Tolle tells a story of the beggar sitting on a box, and the man approaches, and the beggar says, "Have any spare change?" And the man says, "I have something better than that. Have you ever looked inside that box you're sitting on?" And the beggar says, "No, it's just an old box. I've been sitting on it for years." And the man says, "I encourage you to look inside," and walks away. And the beggar's a little miffed that he didn't get any spare change, but he decides to open the box. And of course, the box is filled with gold. And there is gold available to all of us, whether it's within our own soul, in the people around us, or the path beneath our feet. And our work is to pay attention and recognize the treasures that are available to all of us. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, consider subscribing, and I'd appreciate a good review. I'd love to hear your experience with synchronicity. You can DM me on Instagram @OpenDoorGrowth. If you'd like a free download of the first chapters of my book, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, there's a link in the show notes. And if you'd like to find out how spiritual psychology might benefit you in your life, or learn more about my 3-month mentorship program, send me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Deep gratitude as always to my supporters on Patreon. And blessings on your path. Until we meet again, this is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.